Yeah, so I kind of mentioned a little bit before, but I know people kind of joined in. We have a little bit of agenda today, so I'm going to share my screen and just kind of go through the agenda for today, and then we'll get right into everything. So, oops, I can't see your all wonderful, wonderful faces. All right, so the agenda for today, it's going to be a lot of kind of admin stuff, and then we're going to see if we can focus. We'll probably have most practice actually doing some coding stuff, like coding along, which I think will kind of work things out for the phase two project. But we're basically going to go overview and next week, and then the fact that we have a break week after that, and then talk about like the blogs, about phase one project, kind of like reviewing a little bit of what we've seen. The phase two project, we're launching that, so that's actually live on Canvas now. But we'll go over it, briefly, kind of say, what it is. It's based around linear regression. So we'll kind of talk about that. And then we'll actually, like I said, get some practice on performing linear regression, hopefully as like a group. I saw already a few people submit some submissions on the Kaggle competition, which is great. So hopefully we'll get some more people to do that and practice out. Okay. Cool. So first on the agenda is overview of next week. So next week, since we're starting our phase two project, will be project week. So just like phase one, there's no new material study groups that we'll have. It'll mostly be focused around just like I might kind of change the study groups more into office hours. Just basically time for people to ask questions and stuff like that. If there's something specific that everyone would like to go a little deeper in, like maybe we didn't get a chance to, something about linear regression, we can make it into like a more formal like lecture study group, and I can maybe put something together. But it's more going to be like an office hours open for next week. Okay. The week after that is going to be break week. So you all actually get a little bit of an extra like time to finish up your project. Now I will say that break week is that don't definitely relax. Like don't like try to like work everything through. But I do think that usually break week is a good time to kind of do some catch up. Especially if you're feeling really, really behind on something. You're like, okay, like I can take some time in break week um, to what's it called? Like do your catch up, kind of finish things up. And then we'll continue on when we come back from break week onto phase three and the project two assessments. Okay. So that's kind of what break week will look like. And we come back for in March with phase. I guess next week is March, so like early March, we'll come back and start phase three. Okay. Any questions on that, like scheduling wise?
Sounds good.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. All right. So, kind of one thing I wanted to mention is the blog posts. So right now I have two people who have turned in their blog posts. I'm going to call them out because they did a great job. Chuck and Eric. Ooh, I think it was Eric S. Who I don't see is on right now. But they have their blog post in for the first one, which is awesome. But it means that you all haven't had a blog post yet. So one thing I'd recommend, I know like, get super busy, especially with assessment and the phase two material, so I totally understand where people might not have finished it. I'm a lot less strict on it. It's not something that you need to turn in right away, at least I don't require it. But I think it's something that you should get on top of, otherwise you're going to have two blog projects and then three blog projects and four blogs you have to do by the end of this program. So definitely take the time to go write your blog. In fact, maybe use break week. That's a great time to just kind of hammer out a couple blogs. One of the suggestions on Canvas is like you can write about your project. One thing I recommend is like you don't have to worry about writing about the whole project. You can write about one aspect of your project that you found interesting, whether it's some part of visualization or maybe collecting the data or like some interesting thing that you had found that you can talk about. And it doesn't have to be super long. But you can also blog. I think Chuck had done something with his Peloton data, if I remember that right, for your blog, right, Chuck? Yeah. So you can also write about something else too, if there's something that interests you that you want to talk about that wasn't related to your project at all, at least your phase one, phase two project. Okay. Any questions on that? Cool. Real quick on that, just remember that it is like it's a submission, so you would just submit the link to your blog post. A big recommendation that I recommend for students is using Medium. That's usually a really great platform, but it doesn't have to be. The reason why I recommend Medium is because actually find quite a lot of students who post on Medium will actually get their stuff picked up by publishers and stuff like that, and it gets a little featured, and it's kind of nice. Kind of builds a little bit of your data science cred. Okay, cool. All right, so moving on then. phase one project. So I just wanted to do some quick review on that. Thank you, first of all, like for people who did all the surveys. I think most people did it. I still think maybe a few people had not finished that phase one survey. Do you all know what I'm talking about when I say phase one survey, right? So I think Ashton shared it back in Slack. It's also on the phase page. I think you could find the survey as well. If you're looking for it, you're like, oh shoot, I meant to do that, but I never did it. Just message me if you can't find it. So those surveys are really helpful. There'll be a second phase two survey coming out too, like between like now and like next week. So definitely when that comes out, I'll point it out and make sure you guys do that because it does help, me, it does help Flatiron kind of figure out, what worked well, what didn't work well. And I think, people were very honest, which was great. Let's see here. Other things, assessments. So I'm still finishing up assessments. I actually have like about 50% of them pretty much completed to return. However, I don't like to return like only half of them, then have the other people like wait. So I'm close to, once I get about like that 80-90% mark, I usually just return them all at once. So you'll probably see that, maybe even today, but definitely before Monday of next week of assessment feedback. That way you can use that assessment feedback. I know we've already talked during our assessments, but you can use that feedback hopefully for the second project. Okay. Some things that I noticed from phase one project that's something to kind of keep in mind is definitely focus on your narrative in your notebook, in your technical notebook. Definitely think about like a lot of times people will in our assessment, one-on-one conversation, people will be able to express, justify what they've done and why they did it this way and stuff, which is great. But then also it's not in their notebook, which again, like arguably some people don't mind that as much. I think it's one of those things. It's like, hey, if you have some insight on there, put that insight in that notebook so someone will see it and see, hey, like they're like this person knows what they're talking about. It's like, oh, I can see why this person went from here to here, or why they dropped the missing values or whatever. Having that in your notebook is super super useful, and I think it just shows a little bit of your like again credibility as a data scientist when someone looks at your notebook, even very briefly. Kind of related to that is your definitely like in general form your narrative. Remember that you're kind of like talking to like another data scientist, and so you kind of want to form it, like we know that the notebook is not going to be literally what you like did, but I think I've talked with a bunch of people about this, is that you can kind of form your notebook a little bit. You can kind of edit it and say, okay, like, well, I went all these different directions, but to form a full idea, let's focus on this and then move on to the next part. There isn't, like, in my opinion, a very, very strict structure that you have to stick to. But I think if you, especially for this next phase two project, to focus on the data science lifecycle, I think that would be a really good job. And remember, like, data science lifecycle technically says, a little bit of like, you do some feature engineering or cleaning, and then you do some modeling, and then you go back to feature engineering. So you might have a little bit of that where you have the kind of feature engineering and then modeling, and then like a new feature engineering because that model didn't perform very well, and then talk about modeling again. But you can kind of edit that too. You don't have to show every single instance of what you did. If you ran model.fit 50 different times trying to find the right model, you probably don't have to show 50 different times you tried that model fit. Really, you're just looking for like that insight where like, oh, like we tried this because this ended up being useful and being performative for the model. Okay. Does that make sense to people? Give me a thumbs up if that all made sense. Okay, so that's probably the biggest thing. Next, I think presentations overall were quite good, like the non-technical presentations. Just always remember, one thing I will tell you is practice. Like practice at least once. Like even in front of a mirror is better than nothing. Recording yourself. Like I don't think everyone like feels super comfortable with this because it's weird to hear your own voice. But recording yourself on a presentation and then kind of watching it over can really help you a little bit. Just see like what things you like, oh, like, I would have said this instead, and you take a note and practice again. I think that practice is going to help. And again, one big part of data science is that communication. We focus a lot over the the material of like doing the technical stuff, but a big portion of it is communication. And really the only way you can get good at like communicating your thoughts, especially to someone who is not a data scientist, we call them non-technicals, to those stakeholders, is really practice. And so the best way to practice that is just doing it. So something to kind of focus on for future stuff. And also, let's see here, for actual presentations, I say like, really think about like, when I am presenting this slide, what is the stakeholder, the audience thinking when they're viewing this slide? And that might kind of put it's like, you know what, maybe I need to reduce the complexity of this slide or take this slide and split it into 4 parts, and still spend the same amount of time. So really think about like what you're conveying and what the stakeholder, the audience will pay attention to when you present. Okay. Sound pretty good? Any questions on anything I've said so far? Cool. All right. And of course, you got to find your style too. Like, obviously, I have my own different style of presenting. Maybe I'll show you all an example next week or something of kind of a similar thing. Like, I was going to put something together that was going to be like, oh, like how I would present this information. So maybe I'll make sure to put something together so to share out with you all. All right. So that's all I had for a really phase 1 project. Does anyone want to like chime in about something that they like? It's like, oh, like something I realized, that I think is important to share with the group about phase 1 project. I know it feels like forever ago, but I don't know if anyone has anything to share. No? Okay. I could give you guys a little bit of awkward silence, just enough to make you say, well, maybe I should share something. That's okay. If you guys do find something, you're like, oh yeah, I did have something, you can always share it with the Slack too. All right. So now we're going to talk about phase 2. So let me go, the phase 2 project. So let me go ahead and go to this link here. And this is also on Canvas, right? So really quick thumbs up. Who has seen the phase 2 project already? Like at least briefly look at the README. Okay, I see a few thumbs up. Cool. All right. So if you haven't yet, just know that you can see that now, right, on Canvas. So it's available to check it out. The main thing I want to bring this together is that this really should take you like about 30 hours to complete. If you find yourself like going like much more, I think that's maybe a time for you to start like thinking about how you should cut it down. One thing I like to suggest to people is look at the data science lifecycle and then look at like how long you have for the week and split up the data science lifecycle. It's like, you know what, I should take this amount of time for, these couple days. For example, data cleaning, like, you say, okay, like after Tuesday, I should be done with data cleaning and be focusing on feature engineering. I think that's a good way to phrase it. It's also kind of important to know that it's like, there's always so much you can do. So let's say on Tuesday, you're like, ooh, like I got most of my data cleaning done where it's usable, but there's some other stuff I could kind of like, tease out of this, or, maybe make it a little bit better, or, more capable for me to actually do something with. I would actually argue, say, stop there on that Tuesday. It's like, okay, Tuesday was going to be done. I still had some stuff to do, but it's usable. Stop on that Tuesday and move on to the next part and document, like, I need to do these things. And then at worst, you complete the next parts, you get a project done. You're like, wow, I'm done early. It's like Thursday and I still have plenty of time for me to, put some new stuff. You can go back to that, kind of like thing that you put on pause and you say, okay, let me go ahead, go back here and like readjust my models or whatever you were doing. I think that's a good strategy. And then if you don't have time, you can always move that stuff into your next step, saying like, in the future, if I had more time, these are things that I would look at next. So I think that's a good way to manage your time versus trying to tackle it down. And then once it's tackled down, then move on to the next part, because sometimes those steps take a little bit longer than you expect. So I think that's kind of a good way to work, especially for something like this where you don't always know what the roadblocks are going to hit as you're moving through a project. Does that make sense to people? Okay, cool. But anyway, so 30 hours I think is about right, maybe 40 hours, but I think you all have a little bit more confidence in using Python at this point. The project's going to focus on basically, it's going to be King County and the house sales. So you're going to have some information. So the date the house I think was sold, views, square footage, all this stuff. So these are your features, and you're going to use linear regression to try to predict the sales price of houses. So in this case, you're actually going to have all the data you need from this repo here. So when you go to Canvas, you can kind of click the link to get to this repo. You actually have all the data right here. And that's going to have all the sales prices. So there isn't any data in here that has no sales prices. Okay. And then there's also some information about the column names in that data directory. So saying like what the details are about what the columns represent. So you can kind of figure out, for example, if you see view here, it might be confusing. Like, what does that mean? You can check out, it's like, oh, it has been viewed, right? So that way you kind of know, it's like, oh, that's what the meaning of that feature is. Okay. Your stakeholders for this case, Last time he told you specifically like Microsoft was, looking to go into the movie business. This is actually much more open to you get to choose kind of like who your stakeholders are, who do you, you can kind of picture, like decide what that business is going to be doing on hiring you as a data scientist to look at this data. If you're really stuck, like, I don't really know who the stakeholders are, a good kind of place to be at is like, hey, a real estate agency hires you on, say, hey, we want to basically price these houses and get an idea of how much these houses should sell so we can help people buy them or sell them as a real estate agency. You can probably, I've seen some really creative ones that people kind of come up with, like little spins and stuff like this on this. I think that's perfectly fine too. One thing I would say is that maybe by like you should focus on your stakeholders first. Don't dive into the problem right away without like thinking about who your stakeholders are. Otherwise, you kind of like do your whole thing like, oh, who am I building this for? So one thing I would suggest is that by the end of I want to say end of Monday, but if you went into Tuesday just because you're kind of falling a little behind, that's perfectly fine. Message me who your stakeholders are, what your business problem is, and that way I can kind of give you a thumbs up saying, yep, that sounds pretty good. Go ahead and go into the data. I just don't want someone to have a stakeholder and then I'm like, ooh, you know what? I think this is going to be really tough for you to focus on. So just kind of check with me first once you kind of figure out who you're going to focus on as a business stakeholders. Okay, does that make sense, everyone? Cool. See nods, see thumbs up. Awesome. All right. But from there, it's kind of the same idea. We have our GitHub repo. So you already seen about building up your repo, building up your README, your Jupyter Notebook, which is your technical notebook, right? So that's kind of like where all your work's going to live. You potentially could have multiple notebooks, but usually I say just one. I think that's perfectly fine. Your non-technical presentation, just like before, about 5 minutes, no more than 10, probably between 5 and 8 being kind of on the higher end would be good. Okay. I think I'm not going to go through the whole details in there, but the big thing for your Jupyter Notebook is make sure you kind of focus on the full data science lifecycle. So look at the data science lifecycle, CRISP-DM or Awesome, right? I think that's shown in the curriculum. Kind of framing your notebook around that, I think will give your essentially that narrative voice of kind of making sure you flow the like guide the audience through your work. Okay, cool. And that's kind of it. That's the project. I think it's pretty straightforward. But are there any questions about this project or anything we talked about? No? Sound pretty good? Okay.
Just a quick question. Just to reiterate, you said the assessments are going to be the week after break week?
That's right. So it will be the week we come back from break week.
Okay, thank you.
The 15th, right?
Yes. So let me actually look at it. I think I marked on the calendar, but if I haven't yet, I'll put it on there. It will be, yes, March 15th will be when we start assessments again. Okay. Cool. So you guys get an extra week. So that's kind of nice. All right. Any other questions? No? Okay. So I just put a little couple notes here. I'll share this agenda too. Like maybe I'll put it on the homepage. But choose your stakeholders. That's a big part, and then check with me that you have a good business problem stakeholders, just to give me, just so I can give you a thumbs up. You should address actionable insights. So one of the things you should think about is like you're not just building a model to make a good prediction, but you also want to say what you want to tell the stakeholders once you have a predictive model. This is actually a really common thing in the industry where a company will build or like a data scientist will build a machine learning model, but then you still want to go back to the stakeholders who like say it's like, okay, we understand we can put stuff in your model and then outputs like what we should do, but like how should we use this? And a good thing to actually use, especially with linear regression, is it's very explainable. You can actually look at your linear regression coefficients and say, hey, these are the things that are important that you should know about this model and how it functions. So you can kind of imagine if you find one of those features being very, for the coefficients, one of those features being very, very important in the sense that like after scaling, you see that it has a high value. You might actually say, hey, like this is something that you should really focus on. Turns out square footage is like the most important part of the house. So you should really focus on that. And especially if you find something that's maybe counterintuitive, maybe you find for this area that the number of rooms don't really matter, for the price or whatever. I'm just making something up. But those are things that you want to say, hey, like turns out room numbers don't really matter. So don't try to convert, a room into 2 rooms or whatever, like it's not going to really help the price or whatever. Okay. Cool. And then again, data science lifecycle. That's probably the newest part that we hadn't really talked about before. Okay, cool. So that's kind of all the admins kind of stuff. Are there any last questions, anything that popped in your head about moving forward for over the next week?
So,
Mhm.
because we choose our own business problems, this
Mhm.
could have like, we could have widely different types of presentations and way we approach the problem, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that your question? Just you? It's okay to
Yeah,
have like very different presentations.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's actually kind of fun too, is also seeing what people, you can be creative with this as well. I don't want to give too much. I don't want to like spoil your guys' minds with your, with what I've seen before with your own creativity. But there's some great things that you can do to kind of focus on. The biggest thing is just make sure, again, just check in with me just so I can make sure it's manageable and it's still like something that I think you can do reasonably. Like for example, if you ended up getting a stakeholder a business problem that makes you only focus on two features to predict the house price for whatever reason, I'd be like maybe we need to adjust this so you can really practice your data science skills too and show those off. Cool. All right, any other questions or comments? No, pretty good. All right. So the rest of this time, then, we're going to do some practice, practicing linear regression. So the way I basically am forcing you guys to do some practice, so my mouse stopped working. Come on, mouse. There we go. Okay. Maybe it's dying. But so what we're going to do some practice is with Kaggle. So we did that Kaggle competition, stuff like that. And this is why I purposely chose, if you look at the data set for Kaggle, it's definitely more complex than the data that you're going to have. But it's similar in the sense that it's about house prices and it's got some features and stuff like that. So I think it's a good proxy for like what you'll do in the what's it called, the main in your phase 2 project. I think those skills will carry over very easily. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is show you a little bit, just a notebook here, and then I'm going to show you a little bit like what you can do. And then I showed you last time how to make a Kaggle notebook, Kaggle kernel directly on Kaggle, but we can also work on Jupyter Notebook, and I'll show you all how to like upload it from there. So I just wanted to go through some stuff that maybe we haven't seen directly, and I think it's kind of useful to just